You ever sit in a quiet moment and realize the world thinks you don't belong? That's where this starts. Rain, beating the windows a private jet idling like a caged animal, and a man so loud he could declare himself king. 47 minutes later, he would be escorted off that plane in handcuffs, and everything he'd built would begin to fall apart. But that first minute, that's where the story happens. Act 1. The quiet. Before. My name is Maya Carter. I'm tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that comes from closing a deal that feels like moving a mountain with a spoon. I'm on board the Meridian, a long-range business jet sunk into 1A with a paper cup of coffee swapped for a neat pour of something stronger, because sometimes you pay in whiskey for sleep you can't otherwise buy. I'm wearing a faded college sweatshirt, old jeans with a patch at the knee and a travel tote that looks like it's been through 2 continents and 3 product launches. I like to fly low-key. Keeps people from asking questions, keeps people from deciding for me who I am before I say a single word. Tonight, I'm supposed to be invisible. The flight is one of those company arrangements we run through blind trusts, operationally efficient, legally neat, and the Meridian is officially part of the fleet for a client program. In real life, it's mine, and I've learned not to wave that fact around. When you build a business from nothing into something that people notice, anonymity becomes a luxury and a strategy. Outside the jet, a storm grinds the coast into gray mush. Inside the cabin hums like a living room with better upholstery. 2 rows back, a couple of young tech founders are comparing notes for a pitch deck on their phones. A flight attendant glides by like a trained Tide warm and professional. She calls me Ms. Carter, like she's known me a long time. I close my eyes for the first real breath in days and I let the hum of the engine swallow the noise of my head. Then he walks in. Act 2. The clash. He storms up the aisle like an opinion with a suit on. Tall, sharp, the kind of haircut that says I have someone to handle the rest and the watch probably cost more than my first house. He's accompanied by a woman who looks like she got here by contract and a small white dog impossibly wrapped in designer fabric because of course he did. He's on his phone the whole time, not talking so much as issuing commands, and his voice fills the cabin, which is weird in a space that usually favors whispers. Listen, Jerry, I need wheels up in 10, he barks, and that would have been the end of it if he'd stayed in his lane. But then his eyes land on me on the bag that looks thrifted on the hoodie. I see the calculation land value equals appearance, therefore assumption equals ownership. He steps forward, his hand clipping my armrest like he owns physics. You're in my seat, he says. Not a question. Not even close. Here's the thing, I've been on the receiving end of that look my whole life. The look that counts you out before you open your mouth. I could have moved, walked to the back, pretended not to care. Sometimes you pick battles that save your energy for the ones that matter. But this wasn't about a chair. This was about tolerating an assumption that had a habit of turning into harm. So I didn't budge. He leans in, voice dipped in condescension. Sir, I say, and he freezes. How do I know his name? Because when you run a company, sometimes people think they can keep it secret. They can't. My name's Maya Carter. I don't want trouble. He smirks, and then he opens his mouth in a way that makes the cabin colder. You can't be serious. You don't look like the owner. I paid extra for this seat, and I'm not moving for a... He finishes with a butchered provocation, a phrase meant to humiliate, and when he says it, it lands like a slap. People in the cabin shift. Some laugh, nervously phones have already started to come alive. The young founders start filming kids with followers, know a moment when it arrives. My flight attendant, Anna, steps closer and says calmly, Sir, please take your seat. He snaps at her calls, her help under his breath, and that's when the entire thing snaps. He grabs at my bag, fingers fumbling like a man trying to prove a point to himself. I step in front of it, not with fury, not with bluster, but with a quiet that can feel heavier than thunder. Do not touch my things, I say. He doubles down, leans into the space between us, and insults follow cheap jokes about welfare assumptions about where I grew up, all of it the same rotten fruit. The cabin hears it. The young founder's live stream doubles viewers by the second. Here's the twist, not the cinematic twist, but the practical one I call. Not for revenge, not for spectacle. I call my general counsel and I speak into the phone with an even voice, initiate gray protocol. He hears the name he didn't want to hear. The woman he's berating is not a passenger. She is the owner of the aircraft. The cabin goes quiet in the way only a room full of witnesses can, sudden and sharp. The pilot's voice comes over the speaker with that practiced calm. We have a security situation, and the man who thought volume equaled authority can't buy his way out of being a security issue. Ground support is notified, and within minutes the scenario flips from he says to we have evidence. The people with cameras have footage. The safety team has used words like harassment and interference with crew, and the live stream has given the moment a megaphone. He tries to negotiate himself back into dignity, flailing for versions of I didn't mean. And it was a mistake, but the damage is recorded, and the law in the narrow space of an aircraft is not interested in his wallet when a safety policy is involved. Officers bored, they watch the tape sliding across a phone screen and, one by one, the props of his life. The watch, the smug smile, the I pay for this argument, stop mattering. Act 3. The aftermath and the question. I never set out to ruin someone's life. That was never the point. The point was to refuse to move for a person who had decided I didn't belong to register in real time that some assumptions are not harmless. They are corrosive. He was escorted from the plane. Handcuffs are never a tidy sight, but sometimes they're the only corrective a system will allow in a moment when privilege meets aggression. The video blows up. Of course it does. In a world with cameras in pockets, truth travels faster than spin. Within hours, this man's firm is fielding cancellations. Clients are pulling money, and what looked like a last-minute hustle to save a meeting becomes the first step in a cascade of investigations. Journalists knock on doors, regulators call, and what he'd spent a career protecting reputation access, the illusion of untouchability, begins to erode. For me, the fallout is different. There are interviews, requests, an avalanche of strangers sharing stories. That happened to me, thanks for standing. I thought I was alone. So I start a small initiative, a nonprofit focused on dignity in transit, because if a humiliating incident can become a teachable moment, you owe it to the next person to turn it into a blueprint. But the ending isn't tidy. The man faces legal consequences, financial collapse, personal ruin. Some will argue that's justice. Others will call it public shaming. That's where the story sits now, a mirror held up to a culture that still too readily judges people by what they wear, how they sound, what their bag looks like. The mirror is cracking in 1,000 pieces and everyone sees something different in the shards. Here's what I want you to think about. Did I overstep by calling legal? Was the response proportional? Should confrontation be private or public? When a person uses race, class, or assumptions to diminish another, what is the right fix? Education, consequence, or both? I don't pretend to have the single answer. But I do know this. Silence protects the person who is wrong, and sometimes the only option that matters is to refuse the erasure. If you've ever been told you don't belong, in an airport, at a job, in a classroom, tell me. Drop a comment below with where you were, what happened, and how you felt when you refused or when you stayed quiet. Do you think I did the right thing? Is public accountability fair or a rush to cancel? I want the debate, smart, messy, honest. Because those conversations are where change actually starts. If this resonated, hit like, share the video with someone who needs to see a truth they've maybe ignored, and subscribe if you want more stories about people who stood their ground and the complicated fallout that followed. America likes a tidy hero tale, but real life is messy, and your story might be the one that helps the next person stop being moved from where they belong. What would you have done?